Had he been president of the CSA, you, would you have signed off on General Lee's plan to invade the North? If not, what alternative strategy would you have employed? Because really Lee's plan was, the original invasion was to be a strategic offensive, but a tactical defensive campaign. Didn't work out that way.
First of all, Dan, I would never have been the president of the Let's have that.
If you were an advisor.
If nominated, I would not run. If elected, I would not serve. But laying that aside, to give you at least a view of what the options were, Jefferson Davis, in the summer of 1863, did have options before him. He had a situation in the Mississippi River Valley, Vicksburg, the last citadel, major citadel of the Confederacy on the Mississippi River, is beleaguered. He has seen Lee perform one invasion of the North, which did not end well, at Antietam. And he has a Secretary of War, in this case James Seddon, who is putting pressure on him. We need relief in the West, and we need it much more than we need any new plans for offensive action in the East. And Lee has to override all of those voices that Jefferson Davis is hearing. Lee succeeds in large measure because he has a very close relationship with Jefferson Davis. And Davis yields to his importunity. Lee has two major reasons for wanting to confine his action to the East, not seeing troops from his army transferred to help out with the situation in the West. One is, he got into this war to protect Virginia. I mean, he said that over and over again. That's Robert E. Lee's motive. He did not give over an entire lifetime's career in the United States Army. He did not kick his oath down the steps to protect Mississippi. It was to protect Virginia. And he was determined to do exactly that. And for that reason, he's not going to peel off any troops and send them anyplace else, because it's Virginia. He is in the business of defending. The second thing is that Lee understood, probably as well as anyone else in the Confederacy, that the long-term prospects of the Confederacy were not good. If this war was going to be a long one, the Confederacy was going to lose it. The only way the Confederacy would win the war would be to take the war north of the Potomac, strike hard, strike fast, strike a blow primarily at Northern political will to wage the war. And the summer of 1863 was going to be a very good season to do that, because Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation in September of 62. 6 weeks after that, the fall elections kick Republicans out of the governorships of New Jersey and New York, two key states, and Republicans fall by the dozens in the congressional elections. Now, there are going to be gubernatorial elections and legislative elections in Ohio and Pennsylvania in the fall of 1863. If Lee can win some kind of victory, if Lee can just cause a long-term disturbance in Pennsylvania, then it's very possible that war-weary voters in Pennsylvania will go for a Democrat. Likewise in Ohio. Then you have New York and New Jersey that have already moved into the Democratic column. And what happens then if 4 Democratic governors announce that they're going to have a meeting, like the governors had at Altoona in September of 1862, in which they're going to refuse to send any further state volunteer units to the war, and that Lincoln must go to the negotiating table with the Confederates? Lee sees that very clearly. And his long-term objective is to create that kind of crisis, to throw that kind of stone in the pond of Northern political will. Now, what is going to be the best way to accomplish that? Well, Lee speaks to some people, as he spoke to Davis, as he spoke to James Longstreet, in terms of caution. We're going to invade the North. We're not going up there looking for trouble. If there's going to be a battle, we'll fight on the defensive. But to other people, he says, well, if I go north and move north fast enough and the Army of the Potomac comes stringing and straggling up after me and gives me a chance to bite off pieces of it, I'll do that. I'll strike at them. Now, you might say, well, is Lee being inconsistent? No. No, because understand that in 19th century warfare, nobody sets out timetables. if you study modern military history, D-Day, everything's worked out with a timetable. You have a certain objective you're going to achieve by here, certain objective there, certain objective there, and you've got to reach it by these certain days. Nothing like that was possible in the 19th century. So it was assumed that when you went on campaign, you were doing improv. You were going to meet the situations as they came. And Lee was not really doing any kind of deceit by suggesting to some people he would do one thing or to some people he might do another. That was simply part of the game. A general on campaign with his army, especially moving into enemy territory, was very much at his own discretion about handling a situation, because it did have to involve a large measure of improvisation.
Did Lincoln and Halleck mess up by not letting Hooker go in and try to find the slimmest part of that snake of Lee going up north?
Well, a lot of people thought afterwards that Joe ought to have been given a second chance, and that the plan he formulated for countering Lee's invasion, which was to lunge westward from Frederick, cross the mountains, and as Lincoln put it, break this army. It's got to be thin somewhere. Let's break it there. A lot of people have wondered if that really was not a good plan, and maybe it might have been. The problem is that by that point, relationships between Joe Hooker and especially Henry Halleck were past the point of any kind of return. I mean, the two had never been on very good terms to start with. Hooker had always reported directly to Lincoln. But after Chancellorsville was such a colossal botch-up. I mean, Hooker had promised so much and delivered so little that Lincoln is now listening much more to Halleck about taking Hooker's braggadocio with some degree of caution. And when finally Hooker makes the case to Lincoln, well, it's going to have to be him or me. Lincoln says, okay, it's not you. And at that point, Lincoln sends the order, and George Meade, on the 28th of June, becomes commander of the Army of the Potomac. 3 days. He has 3 days to command the army, sort everything out, and prepare a miracle by which to defend the North, and especially Baltimore and Washington. 3 days.
Yeah, you speak great at length on the problems that he had in those days. Of course, at the time all this was going on, Milliken's Bend had taken place out in the west. And why did the Confederates attack there? How is it part of the larger strategy at Vicksburg?
Well, it's more from the Confederate point of view. It's truthfully more symbolic, really, because Vicksburg by this time was under siege, and just I think about 2 weeks before Milliken's Bend occurred, Grant had moved his supply lines to the east side of the river. He was getting his supplies through, up the Yazoo River.
Milliken's Bend was on that side of the river.
Right. Milliken's Bend is in Louisiana. It's on the west side of the Mississippi. And so Milliken's Bend had been a major supply depot. There were several kind of scattered up and down the river. And so from that standpoint, I mean, it was in some ways pointless because the supplies were already safe on the other side. Taylor did find this out just a few days before Milliken's Bend. There was another brigade that went down to Young's Point, which is another place on the river. So it was going to be a two-pronged attack. Once they overwhelmed the Union forces, they were going to meet in the middle. And there was hope that they might be able to kind of keep those outposts and do something. Mm-hmm. And in fact that's what Taylor says later on, after the war when he's writing his reminiscences is we were under pressure to do something for Vicksburg.
Now, I wonder, Dan, in this case, if that's a good question to ask. Well, the question you asked me, it might be a good question for Linda, and that is, do you think that it was a mistake for Davis to let Lee conduct this invasion? Would it have been a better idea if Davis and Seddon had, in fact, peeled off, let's say, Longstreet's corps from the Army of Northern Virginia and sent it west in shall we say, May of 1863. Would that have been a better thing to do? Would it have made a difference?
A good Confederate president's question.
It is a good question.
And I'm so glad the Confederate president did not seriously consider that.
So please,
You know, gosh, it feels like a bit of a toss-up to me because, you know, it's always if, you know, if things had turned out differently, you know, when Lee moved north. You know, could he have gotten around, you know, the Federal Army and even go a little bit closer to Baltimore or D.C., you know, that still, I think, you know, could have succeeded in terms of the will of the North. But Vicksburg was so important. You know, if they had that number of men, you know, a corps or more out there, or the whole army, I guess you couldn't take the whole army, but you know, I mean, if the relief had been sent out there, you know, it's hard to say.
Or was giving Joe Johnston another corps of infantry just a big waste of time?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. You know, is I don't know if it would have worked if it happened.
Well, he might have gotten Longstreet's corps and then sent a message to Richmond. Now, what about the next one? Right.
here's a question from Doug in Richmond. Briefly on this one, I have so many things that I wanted to get by. But you want to ask this question, Doug. Do you think the prejudice against military history in the university classrooms is responsible for the large number of mistakes, if there are, in military history in our monographs? Do you agree with that, first of all? Are there?
I'm reluctant to talk about the mistakes people make in writing military history monographs on the grounds that it might incriminate me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do people make mistakes in writing military? Of course, we make mistakes writing all kinds of history.
But what he's asking is, has the antipathy toward military history in academia harmed history at all?
No, I think human ineptitude is equal to almost any situation.
That's good enough.
Yeah.
Now,
we don't need to invoke ineptitude to explain why people harbor something of a distaste for military history.
well, let me ask you this. This is kind of a sensitive question. I'd hate to have you bite the hand that feeds you. Yet, the military, the railroad cut in Gettysburg was part of it taken down for a soccer field. Is this academia maybe not seeing military history as is important?
I have to correct you. It was for a baseball field.
Oh, baseball. Forgive me. Yes,
Makes all the difference.
it does. It's true. National pastime.
I don't know how much your virtual book signing audience knows about this incident, but this goes back to 1991, in which a section of the original railroad embankment at Gettysburg, which was owned by the Park Service, was desired by Gettysburg College, my employer, because they wanted to expand the athletic fields. And so a swap of land was arranged. And the swap involved the college giving the Park Service some land and the Park Service giving the college the land that it wanted, that acreage. It was a comparatively small amount of land, but it was battlefield land. And the uproar that ensued over that made national news. And I am so glad I was not teaching at Gettysburg at that time, or I would have been in front of a congressional committee. Because one of my predecessors teaching Civil War at Gettysburg, Gabor Borat, had to appear before a congressional inquiry committee that way. Not that he was involved in it, but you got that summons. That was a very embarrassing moment for both the college and for the Park Service. And some heads did roll. So, is that indicative of carelessness on the part of academe? Well, there was some carelessness on all sides.